and to take care of it and not take it for granted. So don't eat the wrong food or don't do stuff that shows to God I don't appreciate it. So God says, you can have the garden, but there's one thing I don't want you to do. I don't want you to eat of that tree that's in the garden. And I had wanted to preach about that, Pastor Sawyer, how Jesus was cursed on the tree because he had done no wrong, but he had to die for sin, so he had to become sin. So the way he could become sin was to hang on the tree. It was the tree, it was the cross that made him sin, because the cross made him cursed. The cross cursed him. So here he was on the cross, cursed because he was on the tree. Had he not hung on the cross, he could not have died. So the tree has always been a problem for us. And you'll see it here when they told them not to eat of the tree. They had a good relationship. God had blessed them with the garden, and then they were dressing and keeping the garden. So, and Jesus explained that principle. He said, if you love me, keep my commandments. So, see, love is not really in how you feel. It's not an emotional thing. It's doing what God says do. And how do I know you love God? Well, are you doing what God told you to do? I don't care how much you shouted. I don't care. I didn't ask you how you feel. I asked you, did you love him? And he said, if you love me, keep my commandments. So he was saying, okay, now, I want you to love me. So don't eat of this tree. And you know the story. They ate of the tree. And he was standing right there when his wife ate, because he says, and she turned and gave unto him. And he did eat. And I want to gloss on through that because I want to get to the offering. I want to stay there. So they lost, they violated their relationship. Now they had broken relationship with God because God told them not to do it, and they did it. So now God comes back. And when he comes back, they hear his voice. Right? Now, up until that time, God came and Adam and Eve saw him. But now they heard him. Because the person who sins is blind and can no longer see God. If you sin, you cannot see God. Jesus said in John 3, he says, you must be born again, because except a man be born again, he cannot see. So Adam failed. So now he couldn't see. He heard God. But you got to understand the hearing, because Paul says, now faith comes by hearing. So now that he had sinned, he could no longer see. So the only way to have a good relationship with God, now he would have to hear. See, no matter what you do, God's got a way for you to get back. So now they couldn't see. They heard his voice. And the first thing they did was took the fig leaves and covered themselves. And God said, what you doing? He said, we covered ourselves because we were naked. Now, if you would look at the last part of Genesis 3 and 21, it says, for Adam and his wife, the Lord made coats of skin. They clothed themselves with leaves from the tree. God clothed them with this animal skin. In other words, through the blood. See, Adam and Eve says, we broke relationship with you. We know we were wrong because we're naked. And he said, well, who told you we're naked? So now they are going about now trying to establish their own righteousness. They're trying to say to God, we messed up, but what we have done ought to be adequate for us to have a relationship with you. So we put these leaves on, and that ought to be sufficient. That ought to be sufficient for us to be back in relationship. And God said, no, that won't do it. I have to. The only way back to me is through the blood. So we see in this that the offering that Adam and Eve gave to God was not sufficient. It did not establish their relationship again. They were still out of fellowship with God, because once they sinned and tried to compensate and do what they thought was right, because there's a way that does seem right, but and so God says that's not the way. Now let's look a little further. So then Adam and Eve had Cain and Abel. And I'm sure that they taught them. But what you got to understand about Adam, and this is Pastor Cordon, I don't have a whole lot of theology behind this, but I really don't think Adam repented. Because when I look at Hebrews 11, it starts with Abel. He could have easily started with Adam. But he said Abel offered a more excellent sacrifice. Because they taught them the right way. And so when it came time to offer to God, Abel brought the correct offering. Cain did what his daddy did. And God says, I don't want that. And Cain got mad because it displayed his handiwork, the result of his craftiness, his ability. So don't you sit here in church and get mad when there are people who make themselves available to God, and they are promoted not because of their ability, but because of their availability. Then don't get mad because you can do it better. God doesn't want your better. He wants someone that will surrender to Him, because He wants to keep the relationship pure. For years, my wife and I, we've been together now for how many? 37 years. Sometimes she forget and I forget. So it was just a wonderful, wonderful trip. But in the early parts of our relationship, Pastor Sawyer, on Christmas, I would buy her pots and pans, stuff for the house. You know, or I buy her, like if I wanted a 8-track in the car, I buy her 8-track. And I'd be giving her all these gifts, and she'd be looking at me saying, what is this? But I was giving her what I liked. But then I had to understand that if I wanted to love her, I couldn't give her what I